If there was an unspoken list of the most beautiful maniacs, then Alexander Labutkin would take the first line in it. A young man who carefully watched his appearance and earned a reputation as a fashionista, became one of the first St. Petersburg maniacs and one of the most unusual serial executioners of the Soviet era. Alexander was born in 1910 year in the most ordinary working-class family on the outskirts of St. Petersburg. Only 7 years will pass, and the working class, which has defeated Tsarism, will become the most privileged. It seemed that the boy was destined for a bright future. And indeed, the correct origin from the class point of view saved the guy from the troubles of the early years of the formation of Soviet power. At the age of 17, he had no problems getting a job at a secret military factory as a gun shooter. The position is quite enviable, and it was not chosen by a young man by chance. He had adored guns since childhood. However, the usual choice of hobbies for a boy. But, apparently, he liked rifles and pistols for a reason. They took the guy to the factory without any problems, also because his father worked there, who vouched for him. Everything went well at first. Alexander liked the job, the salary, too. But at one point everything abruptly stopped. An accident has happened. A 20-year-old young man lost his arm. Of course, now it is difficult to say exactly what happened. Most likely, it was like this. Labutkin was sent from the Komsomol asset of the enterprise to help the peasants of the region. The guy tried to uproot the stump, or rather, simply blowing it up with a rear checker. But something went wrong and his right hand was torn off. You will not wish anyone to remain disabled at this age. Alexander could no longer work at the same place. However, the Soviet state did not abandon its workers. On the recommendation of the District Komsomol Bureau, Labutkin was immediately transferred to the Aktinsky Combine as a steam conductor. Soon after the change of position, the guy got married. I must say that he was very attractive in appearance.
Hey, I'm not going to beat around the bush. You have to subscribe to the channel and like it so you don't miss new videos.
He tried to take care of himself, dressed in fashion, so that the absence of a hand did not spoil him at all. Labutkin's wife became a certain Maria. She was 3 years younger than her husband and had already served a short term several months for theft. But, having been released, she tied up and was no longer involved in this article. She was considered reformed. The guy moved to live with his young wife and her relatives. But Alexander, separated from his main passion, weapons, began to yearn. During those years, the storage of weapons by civilians was not welcome, so the young man got close to his father's comrade and colleague, who continued to work at a military factory. He built a homemade revolver and cartridges for the future murderer. Labutkin began to practice shooting on his left hand. Perhaps he cherished the dream of returning to his former place of work. One way or another, but one day a young man got tired of shooting only at cans and bottles. He wanted more. Labutkin made his first hunting trip at the end of the summer on the 30th of August, 1933. He went out into the woods with his revolver and suddenly an idea struck him. What if we try to shoot at people? Either it was a big harvest of mushrooms, and there were a lot of people in the forest. The first victims of the maniac were 2 married couples and 1 woman. The workers of Kostroma and his wife by the name of Golubiva, as well as the spouses of engineers Tykomarova and Seltzer, suffered. In those years, the victims were listed in the protocols by their surnames. All these people were returning from the forest with baskets of mushrooms. One of the victims in the case, identified as Engineer Popel, was still alive after she was found, but soon died without regaining consciousness. Of course, there was no question of identifying the criminal. The executioner did not take anything except the change lying in the pockets of the victims. That is, he did not shoot for selfish reasons, he just liked to shoot, hit the target and take his life. He also thoughtfully took away the baskets with mushrooms. The police immediately established that they were shooting from homemade weapons. Instead of bullets, sharpened balls from bearings were found at the crime scene. It was also established that the shooter was clearly experienced. Hit him right in the head from about 20 paces away. An active search began, and the murderer hid. Labutkin was generally characterized by significant breaks between attacks. The maniac carried out his next outing only in winter, on the 2nd of December, 1933. He shot 2 people who were returning home from work. The materials of the case do not appear as poor peasants. Husband and wife Pershead took Valenki, 85 rubles and a bag of groceries. Since the criminal's booty was quite substantial at that time, 85 rubles, quite a large sum, the investigation decided that the hardened bandit was hunting for profit. After the second time, the police revived again. Local offices were additionally staffed with people, constant combing of the forest area was carried out, residents and employees of gunpowder factories were interviewed. Perhaps Labutkin was interrogated, and this forced him to hide again for a while. Another shot from a homemade revolver was fired only on April 11, 1934. However, it is quite possible that the maniac took the life of someone before, but just in another area. In those years, it was not possible to compare such data. It was not customary to compare crimes by nature in different localities. Although it was rumored that they were killed with firearms then not only in the area of gunpowder factories, but also in other areas of Leningrad, as well as in the suburbs. It is likely that the maniac could have had something to do with it. But back to the next deprivation of life. April 11, 1934. The victim was an elderly locksmith coming from work. The criminal took a set of tools, 150 rubles, and pulled out gold coins and crowns from his mouth. The monster did not wait in vain. By April, the intensity of neighborhood patrolling had significantly decreased. And really, why wait if everything seems to be over? But, unfortunately, everything has just begun. After the massacre of the locksmith, patrolling resumed. The territory of the crime was suggestive of a serial maniac, because everything happened in the same area. 6 months later, on November 13, 1934, the body of a bird hunter was found in the forest. Alexander took the cages with the captured birds from him. Then, in January of the 35th, 2 married couples were shot dead, and not far from the site of the previous attack. Probably, we will never know what exactly prompted Alexander Labutkin to a brutal hunt for people. It is quite possible that in this way he was avenging his injury. Being offended by the whole world, the young guy wanted to hurt others in order to feel relief. A certain influence on Labutkin could also be exerted by his wife, clearly belonging to criminal elements. The loss of the arm provoked a significant decrease in income. The new position was not so lucrative at all. And the young wife wanted material well-being, and she knew how to achieve it, by stealing. Moreover, the girl already had experience. True, her husband had somewhat different hobbies, and the earnings from the attack were small. Besides, it's no secret that professional thieves take the lives of victims only in case of extreme necessity, trying not to get involved with wet cases. But Alexander aimed to take lives. By the way, the maniac actively attracted his wife to his dark deeds. So, the next massacre on February 17, 1935, was clearly committed by 2 people. The tracks indicated that the victim was first lured into a trap by a certain woman, and then a man had already dealt with him. And this time there was nothing significant about the elderly worker with him. That is, the motive of profit for the crime was not the main one. When the assumption was made that all this was the work of a mentally ill person, and the police began to work out this version. The maniac made a fatal mistake in his last deadly outing. He left one of the victims alive. On the 18th of March of the 35th year, going out hunting, he shot lovers who were walking in the woods. A man who turned out to be a waiter at the European hotel, by the name of Sakov, was deprived of his life, and a girl by the name of Anderson survived, as the bullet passed by casually. Moreover, she woke up at about the moment when the maniac was taking off her jewelry. But suddenly Alexander liked a young woman, and he decided not to finish her off, but even invited her on a date. When she came home, the victim shared a close friend. She seriously considered going on a date with her boyfriend's executioner. She liked the maniac so much. The girl described him to her friend as well-groomed and beautifully dressed. The friend, unlike the victim, turned out to be a more reasonable girl and immediately turned to the police. The victim was interrogated, and she told about the reception of the criminal. The absence of the right hand. According to such a tip, it turned out to be very easy to find Labutkin. During a search of the Klobutkins' home, 3 guns were found, but the crime weapon itself was not found immediately. The criminal himself and his household were silent, knowing that if the weapon was found, they would not be well. The revolver was found thanks to the ingenuity of one of the policemen. He drew attention to the radio on the table and, trusting his intuition, decided to disassemble it. The detective's instinct did not let him down. It was there that the revolver was located. Also, some of the victims' belongings were found in their home. First of all, outerwear. She moved into the wardrobe of family members, and to the coat of the Labutkin child. According to some reports, the couple had a son, Maria sewed a fur collar with a jacket from one of the victims. Not only the serial murderer himself appeared in the dock, but also his wife Maria, who actively helped him in crimes, a locksmith who made a maniac revolver, as well as Alexander's mother, through whom he resold some of the victims' personal belongings. Even the neighbor of the monster's mother was brought to court, because he knew about the crimes, but did not report it to law enforcement agencies. Alexander Labutkin was sentenced to death and executed shortly after the trial, in the same 35th year. The remaining defendants in the case received sentences from 10 to 20 years in prison. Maria was also deprived of her parental rights, and the child was probably sent to an orphanage. A neighbor who did not report the massacres, where it should be, was given 5 years. The fate of these people is unknown. Officially, Alexander Labutkin had 15 victims, but in reality there could have been much more, and he himself told the investigation about more than 50 victims in different areas. It was just very difficult to prove it. It is worth noting that, despite the obvious craving for the process of shooting people, Labutkin never mocked either the still living victims or the bodies. He also never tried to use victims for his sexual purposes. This distinguishes him from many other fellow maniacs. All the reprisals were carried out with well-aimed shots directly to the head, and sometimes from a considerable distance. And yet, what pushed an outwardly handsome and, apparently, successful young man among women to commit a crime? Most likely, it was the injury that was such a moment. A man like Labutkin, he never spared money on clothes, bought all the best, walked in a hat. He had to take his injuries hard. Getting a significant injury, deprivation of a favorite job, this could make a maniac harbor a grudge against the whole world. And the instigated resentment and hatred of the UPE with the love of weapons gave rise to such a terrible result. A documentary was made about him from the series. The investigation was conducted by the shooter. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already.